You gave the human nothing but mud, and now he's got a chimney." The words came from Carrick of the Vaughan Coalition, whose 4 compound eyes could barely stay open against the constant pelting rain. The downpour had not ceased for 36 planetary cycles, and even though the Galactic Broadcast League assured all contestants this environment was survivable, it had become a contest of misery and madness, especially for those not used to moisture. The Werin curled their claws tighter around their spines, shivering violently under the useless canopy of spiny ferns. The Ruach tried to flatten themselves in the muck to minimize exposure, which only served to soak them deeper. Meanwhile, the human had upgraded from barely clothed ape to casually squatting monarch of the swamp. They all had the same starting point, 100 meters of uninhabited jungle. No metal, no tools, no stored food. No cover. All surveillance equipment and assistance AIs had been turned off. The great galactic trial was to determine species resilience, innovation, and improvisation without help. Most expected the human to panic or perish. Instead, the human had names for the trees by sunset. His name was Briggs, a middle-aged Terran man with a missing tooth, knuckles like knots of driftwood, and a voice like gravel in a blender. On the first day, he'd walked a wide arc around his drop site, humming something that made no sense to any of the translators. By the end of that day, he'd marked tree bark with mud symbols, stacked rocks in deliberate patterns, and started digging a shallow pit. The alien scoffed. Carrick even transmitted a snide remark to the League. "The Terran builds ant nests. Perhaps he'll lay eggs next." On the second day, the rain began, sheets of it, heavy, relentless, the kind that collapsed shelters made of weak reasoning and weaker planning. The Warren's leaf hut slumped into mush. The Krillix tried tunnelling, only to find the soil flooded. The others huddled under trees, their thermal membranes losing colour, and many were reduced to fetal positions in the mud, vibrating to generate heat. Briggs? He smiled when the storm started. By the third day, he had diverted a stream using fallen branches, not just damming it, but redirecting it into a crude reservoir made of compacted clay and packed debris. He boiled water using a pit filled with stones and a shell-like basin made from bark. No fire yet, but signs of preparation. The League's commentators whispered, "This wasn't normal. No tools, no fire. Yet somehow this human had achieved fluid containment." By day 4, the fire came. Flintless and soaked, he had dried fibrous bark by laying it inside his clothing under his armpits, using his own body heat to evaporate the moisture. When ready, he used a broken piece of hardwood and a spindle fashioned from twisted vine to create friction. It took hours. One observer claimed the human had bled from his hands. Briggs said nothing. He kept spinning. His face was expressionless, his breath slow, his focus absolute, a spark, a whisper of smoke, a flame. By day 5, the others stopped mocking him. Now they were watching. The rain hadn't stopped, not even once, but now Briggs had a fire burning under a crude stone and mud overhang he'd built into a hillside. He caught small reptiles and insects with snares made from bent twigs and vine loops. He roasted them, eyes glinting in the low orange glow of flame, steam rising off his bare shoulders as he dried out inch by inch. He whistled as he worked, sometimes off-key, sometimes eerie, but always content. By day 6, the shelter took shape. He wasn't building something temporary. He'd selected thick, straight saplings for the frame, using mud as mortar and bark as binding. The floor was raised with woven reeds to keep water out. A smoke vent angled backward from the top corner. He even dug a channel to divert runoff around the perimeter. Carrick now watched from a tree, not to mock, but to learn. "Why is he not cold?" asked a tremolo whose gel skin quivered with every drop of rain. "He should be hypothermic," said a Glor ambassador. "He's not even waterproof." "No," whispered Carrick. "He's warm because he planned to be." It was not spoken in admiration, but in dread. On day 7, Briggs started talking to someone, not the aliens, not the cameras, not the League, just someone, or no one. "Jenkins, you see that rock? Flat enough for a table? Don't give me that look." He gestured toward nothing, then dragged a flat stone slab into his hut, propping it up with logs. He rinsed it with hot water, set carved wooden bowls on top. A table, in a jungle, in the rain, with no tools. By day 8 he had carved symbols into the support beams, not for decoration, but for measurement, marks of days, rainfall levels, possible moon cycles. None of the other species had done this. They were too focused on survival. Briggs had moved on to control over environment, resources and time. The alien stared, and then came day 9. Smoke curled from the chimney. The human had built a chimney. He sat on a log, barefoot, shirtless, but comfortable. Clean water bubbled in a bark basin. Fishbones simmered beside wild roots and herbs. The aliens watched from the rain, soaked in, freezing, hollow-eyed and hungry. Briggs lifted the lid of his stew with a leaf and sniffed. "Not bad, Jenkins. A little more salt and we'll have something gourmet." He looked up, finally acknowledging the dozen soaked beings that had gathered in a miserable circle beyond the perimeter of his encampment. "You're one in," he said. "Got to help stack wood if you do." Nobody moved, not at first. Then one of the Werin crawled forward and reached out with a trembling limb toward the dry firewood stack. Briggs tossed him a vine axe he had made the day before. By day 10, they were calling him pack leader. Not Briggs, not human. Pack leader. Even the Werin, who held a deep ancestral pride in their hierarchical bloodline systems, bowed their heads slightly when entering his perimeter. It had started with one of them helping stack firewood, as promised, but what followed was a quiet cascade of submission. None of the aliens asked Briggs to lead. He didn't declare himself. He just worked and kept working. When a Glor lost motor control due to cold shock, Briggs carried him inside and wrapped him in bark mats he dried above the chimney heat. When a Ruach attempted to chew on a rotting branch out of hunger, Briggs wordlessly handed him a wedge of roasted root instead. The jungle was still miserable, the downpour still constant, but the inside of Briggs's hut had become the galaxy's most envied 5 square meters. They helped now, but clumsily. The aliens had little understanding of leverage, shelter dynamics, or heating efficiency. They didn't think in terms of layers, barriers, or venting. Briggs showed them by doing, not speaking. On day 11, he built a lean-to beside the main hut. Not for himself. He still slept in the original frame, raised off the ground where he could stoke the fire at night without getting up. The new lean-to was for guests. He used the word jokingly, but they took it seriously. Within 2 days, 4 species had contributed to its construction. One of the Krillix, whose clawed digits had shredded 3 vines in frustration, finally succeeded in tying a functional knot. He raised it overhead like a trophy. Briggs gave him a nod. "That's a proper grip," he said. "You're hired." The Tremolac melted half a sapling in an attempt to contribute insulation. Its gel-based biology reacted chemically with certain bark types. Briggs simply handed him a new task: dig a runoff trench. The alien's massive gelatinous weight made it uniquely efficient for pressing down the trench edges. It worked better than any tool. They started smiling. Sort of. By day 13, the smell of food cooking over smoke was constant. Roasted insects, tubers, occasionally something resembling meat. Briggs had fashioned a crude smoker from clay and split stones. He didn't waste anything. Bones were sharpened for tools. Bark was stripped for cordage. Charcoal mixed with water became a basic sealant for leaks. The aliens were stunned by his ability to transform garbage into utility. He taught them how to wash their hands before eating. "They're not dirty," Carrick protested. "Doesn't matter," Briggs replied. "Dirt ain't poison, but it carries it." The alien stared at him blankly, So he walked to the stream, cupped water with ash, scrubbed his hands, and pointed. After 3 days, they were doing it without prompting. By day 14, rain flooded Sector 9. The crick den was submerged. 6 of them nearly drowned trying to save their last food bundle. Briggs didn't hesitate. He took the fire-warmed wear-in shelter mats and threw them to the cricks. He then walked into the storm with nothing but a bark shield and cut a new path through the rising flood using a sharpened rock tied to a handle. One of the Glor, seeing him disappear into the trees, whispered, "He's not built for this. He's not amphibious. Why does he move like it's nothing?" "Because we think too much," muttered Carrick, "and he does." When Briggs returned, soaked and bleeding from a thorn scratch, the cricks were dry, the food was salvaged, and 2 new trenches had been formed to redirect water. The human didn't brag. He didn't scold. He didn't command. He just asked, "Next time, you'll yell sooner." Yeah. By day 15, a second chimney rose beside the lean-to. The aliens had learned to mimic his techniques. They used heat-dried saplings, wedge stones, and looped vine scaffolding. Briggs checked their work only when they asked, and when they got it right, he grinned. "See? Told you. Ain't about strength. It's about stubbornness and leverage." They didn't understand half the words, but the meaning landed. The Galactic Broadcast League's ratings skyrocketed. Other planets tuned in to watch the once separate species cooperating like herd animals around the one warm centre of logic and endurance. Commentators speculated whether Briggs had military training, ancient Earth survivalist ancestry, or some kind of implanted AI guidance. None of them could understand that the answer was more insulting. He was just a construction worker from New Omaha who liked camping. By day 16, firewood was delivered to his door like tribute. Food was shared before he even asked. The alien observers no longer questioned why he was thriving. Now they whispered about what it would cost to earn his help. Briggs never said yes. He never said no. He just watched, worked, and asked for elbow room when needed. And when acrylic brought him a half-burned pot they'd shaped from heated clay and said, "I made this. It's bad. You can throw it away." Briggs turned it over in his hands, examined the flaws, and replied, "Not bad. Needs thicker sides, but the base, that's perfect." The key blinked. "You want it?" "Of course I do. You made it. You learned. That's more valuable than the thing itself." The Cray stood straighter that night. So did the others. By day 17, the jungle was quieter because the aliens had started organising. Not just surviving, not just copying, organising. Rotations for foraging, systems for food storage, a crude tally on the inside of the bark wall showing inventory. The hut had grown into a small cluster of structures, fire pits, smoker huts, drying racks, and even an early attempt at a lookout perch, though the Krayik who built it was too afraid of heights to ever use it. Briggs stood on a rock near the centre of the muddy clearing and rubbed his jaw. "Almost looks like a camp now," he muttered. Carrick heard it and tilted his head. "It wasn't before. Before, it was just me trying not to die fancy." The Vaughan blinked slowly and Tenny, twitching. "Is this your instinct? To turn disaster into a system?" Briggs shrugged. "No one's coming to help. Might as well make it work for you." That sentence was repeated across 3 species by the end of the day. Might as well make it work for you. They painted it on bark using ash and berry juice. They didn't fully understand it, but they knew it mattered. On day 18, a wild Buarike creature, native, tusked, and deeply offended by their encampment, charged straight through the perimeter and overturned the smoking pit. Panic spread. The Glor screamed. The Werin climbed the nearest tree. The Tremulac tried to go flat and melt into the mud. Briggs didn't flinch. He stepped forward, caught a vine with a hooked branch he had pre-positioned 3 days earlier, and released a counterweight that dropped a pile of sharpened stakes. It missed the boar, but the noise and force startled the beast enough for it to stumble, then retreat back into the tree line. The trap hadn't worked perfectly, but it had worked. That night, as they rebuilt the smoking pit, the Glor spoke up. "Why did you set that trap there? You had no sign of the creature before." Briggs looked up from the fresh support beams. "Didn't need a sign, needed a plan. You don't wait for trouble before thinking how to meet it." Krillik Namara 4, the one now known as Splitto after he'd stepped on a thorn and walked funny ever since, nodded. "This is why we follow you." "I'm not in charge," Briggs said. "You are," Carrick replied. "You just don't say it." By day 19, others wanted in. From deeper zones of the trial jungle, straggling aliens began arriving, soaked, freezing, teeth chattering, eyes wide at the sight of stacked firewood and stone pathways. Word had spread across the sector. No tools, no tech. But there was one dry place in the world, and a human in the centre of it. Some were let in, some were not. Not all of them came with the right intent. One Triac male walked into camp with a bar club and tried to take food straight from the pot. Briggs didn't raise his voice. He just stood, looked at him, and said, "We help each other here, not steal." "I need more than they do," the Triac growled. "You're soft. You'll share." Briggs didn't argue. He knocked the Triac into the mud with a single punch. It wasn't rage. It wasn't violence for show. It was calculated, practiced, and final. "You don't get it," Briggs said, helping the stunned Triac to his feet after. "This ain't charity. It's a build site. You work or you walk." That night, the track chopped wood for 6 straight hours. By day 20, Briggs had helpers carving stones into shapes that could interlock, primitive bricks. Clay, mud, mortar. A second fire pit was completed with a smoke channel that vented through a hollow log. The camp now had consistent warmth in 2 areas. Someone even hung wet bark strips overhead as a sort of curtain entry flap. The Tremolo called it the Great Wall. Briggs called it a half-decent start. Then came the most surprising moment of all. On day 21, they built him a chair. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't pretty, but it was tall, sturdy, and placed in the centre near the main fire. Carved symbols from 5 different species were etched into the wood, each one representing survival, unity, or resilience. Briggs sat in it once, then stood. "Nah, no thrones," they insisted. So he moved the chair beside the entrance and turned it into a lookout post. It became a tradition. Whoever sat there had night duty. "Keep the fire alive," he told them. "Doesn't matter how tired you are. No fire, we go back to the mud." They took shifts without complaint. The League commentators now debated policy. Some demanded disqualification. Wasn't interspecies cooperation against the original rules? Others argued this was the point. No tools, no cover. And yet the human built more than shelter. He built cohesion. What no one argued anymore was whether Briggs would survive. That question had been answered. The new question was, who else would survive because of him? By day 22, the Galactic Broadcast League added a second satellite. It wasn't for better coverage. It was to get a wider shot. The camp, once a mud pit centred around a single human with no tools, had expanded into a proper multi-species enclave. Not a city, not even a village, but a functioning settlement, fire pits, elevated sleeping racks, food storage huts, a defensive perimeter marked with sharpened poles and tripvines. The chair, Briggs refused to sit on it again, stood watch at the edge like a silent guardian. And the rain still hadn't stopped. The trial was supposed to end when half the contestants dropped out. Historically, that happened around day 10, sometimes 12. But this time, only 15% had withdrawn, because almost every survivor had either joined Briggs or mimicked what he built. On day 23, the League sent a drone to check for contraband. It hovered above the clearing. The firelight danced off its hull. Everyone froze, except Briggs. He ignored it, continuing to split bark into cord with a shard of bone and a wedge rock. The drone scanned everything. No metal, no tech, no forged goods. And then it beeped once, turned and flew off. A Cray spoke softly. Was it checking for weapons? Briggs didn't look up. Everything's a weapon if you're cold and desperate enough. But we don't build for war. We build to stay alive. The next day, the rain grew worse. Wind came with it. The Werin called it a sky howler. Tremble called it vapor torque. Briggs called it a storm. On day 24, half the camp flooded. The perimeter trench was holding. Barely. The mudslides came fast. 2 shelters collapsed. The fire pits smoked. Even the smoker hut toppled. But no one panicked. Carrick shouted orders. Carlicks formed bucket chains. The Tremule pressed themselves into the trench walls to reinforce them. Briggs didn't speak. He worked. He hauled stones. He re-roofed beams. He dragged half a shelter uphill with 3 glaw helping. He carried a collapsed rut out of a flooded den and slapped him until he coughed water. The fire never went out. By day 25, the camp looked battered, but stronger. They rebuilt faster this time. They'd learned. The new beams were thicker. The smoke. Channels more efficient. The bark mats layered better. Food was soaked, yes, but sealed in leaf wraps. Even the most fragile creatures, the Tremble, survived. Briggs didn't smile. He didn't rest. He sat by the fire that night, scraped the mud from his legs with a carved flake of stone, and finally spoke. First storm took 4 of you. This one took none. That's progress. The alien said nothing, but someone handed him a roasted tuber wrapped in clean leaves. He took it, ate in silence. Day 26 arrived with no fanfare, just cold wind and more rain. Briggs woke to find a new structure being framed beside the main pit, not by him, by them. They were building something. He didn't know what, so he asked. It's for you, said Carrick, a place to dry wood, prepare food, work without kneeling. Briggs rubbed the back of his neck. You're giving me a workshop? Number, we're giving ourselves one, but you'll be first to use it. Briggs didn't answer right away, but he didn't say no. On day 27, the final announcement came, a loud crackle of static from a League speaker drone followed by a voice. Trial complete. All survivors prepare for extraction. Pod retrieval begins at first light. Silence. Nobody moved. A glaw finally said, Do we have to leave? Another voice, I don't want to go. The Tremule twitched. If we go back to waiting for someone to solve things for us. Briggs stirred the fire with a stick. You don't have to wait, he said. You just have to build. Day 28 was extraction day. Dozens of pods descended from the sky, glowing with recovery lights. Dry, heated, comfortable. Aliens across the jungle dragged themselves toward them with relief. But in Briggs's camp, most stood still. One by one, some left, not all. A few chose to stay and break down the shelters, taking pieces with them, tools they'd made, bark cords, hardened clay pots, rock wedges, fire-starting kits. None of them had started with tools. Now they carried dozens. Briggs stood at the edge of the clearing as Carrick prepared to board his pod. You were supposed to die, Carrick said. That was the assumption. Still might, Briggs replied, but at least I'll be dry when it happens. Carrick laughed, a sound more hiss than breath. They'll speak of this on every moon. Briggs nodded. Maybe, but don't let it just be a story. Let it be a start. Carrick stepped into his pod. Briggs didn't follow. The League issued his clearance 3 times. He never responded. By day 30, only one signal remained active in the zone. Human. Briggs. Still moving. Still building.